Hi, I'm going to continue with the chapter about the application of the fingers in CPE Bach's book Versuch über die wahre Art des Klavier zu spielen. And we're on paragraph 66. Wir schreiten nunmehro zu mehrstimmigen Exempeln. Hierbei werden die Sprünge mit vorkommen, indem man sie, weil selbige so viel möglich ohne Zwang und nach der ordentlichen Länge der Finger eingerichtet sein müssen, danach abzumessen hat. Findet jemand wegen seiner langen Finger für bequem, gewisse harmonische Anschläge, Brechungen oder Spannungen mit anderen Fingern zu nehmen, als hier vorgeschrieben ist, so steht es ihm frei. Nur muss es keine eingebildete Bequemlichkeit sein. Indem ich bei Verfertigung der Probestücke auf allerhand Fälle gesehen habe, so habe ich die Sprünge und Spannungen mit Fleiß in das Adagio aus dem B gelegt, solche zu erleichtern. Wer Lust hat, solche für sich geschwinde zu üben, dem steht es frei. So, first thing I'll say about that chapter, or that paragraph, is you can get a kind of a clue into how Bach approaches music, how he thinks, how he connects the different elements, like connecting the leaps and the stretches to the kind of the chords or the harmonies. And as well, I just want to say that the piece he's talking about is the second movement of the second sonata. That's the piece here he mentions in the paragraph in B flat major, and it's Adagio sostenuto. And I just wanted to say, he says at the end of the paragraph, who likes can practice such quickly. They're free to do so. Well, perhaps, I don't know if there could be a certain ambiguity about that, but what I want to say, in my opinion, is he's talking about the leaps and stretches, that one can practice them quickly if they like, but he's not saying that one can play that piece in B flat, the Adagio in B flat, quickly if they like. So I just mention that. Zwei Klänge zusammen, welche eine Sekunde voneinander unterschieden sind, werden mit zwei aneinander liegenden Fingern gegriffen. Aus den vorhergehenden und folgenden Noten kann man leicht sehen, welche es sein müssen. Bei Figur 40 finden sich Exempel von allerlei Art. Wir sehen, dass hier abermals der Daumen von den halben Tönen verschont bleibt. Bei den Noten ohne Ziffern bezieht man sich auf das Vorhergegangene. Der einmal vorgezeichnete Schlüssel gilt so lange, bis durch einen anderen aufgehoben wird. So here's the first four examples from figure 40. The first four being for the right hand. And so I'll just talk through them. I mean, the examples belong, that's as much, they belong to the paragraph as much as the text does. And I think since I'm doing the subject of fingering, I might as well, do it as thoroughly as possible, or as good as possible. So I'll talk through them. So in the first example on the right hand, you can see what he's talking about watching out for the note that comes before and the note that comes after. you could maybe see that he chose the second finger for the G because he sees afterwards that the G goes down to the F. So he doesn't put the thumb on the G, he puts the second finger on the G, so he has the thumb available for the F. And then, like he says, the two adjacent fingers play the interval of the second. And I'll demonstrate on the piano that, and I'll play, first of all I'll play box fingering, and then I'll play the AC fingering. And this fingering here would fit with the AC fingering, only you might rather use the thumb on the G in the interval of a second rather than the second finger. So here are the two examples. And the examples are short, so it'll go quickly. Whatever there is to notice, there's only a short space of time to notice it. But I add the AC fingering partly because it's important for me at least to get that down. But secondly, you might hear in providing these different the examples with the different fingering, you might be able to hear part of what was said at the start of the chapter, about how important fingering is, what an integral role it plays in performance, in the the result you have. And so you might hear the difference the different fingering has. So that might be a benefit of these demonstrations. And what he says at the start of the paragraph about fingering being such a integral part of piano playing, it's very often that the things with a huge significance can be said very quickly. They can be said in a sentence or two, and so the length of time it takes to say them does not necessarily equal the importance they take. Because sometimes something very complicated, you could spend a chapter talking about some complicated element, but in terms of how significant it is, it might turn up once a blue moon. And yet something that's ever present in music could be said in a single sentence, but yet it is always relevant. And Horowitz, he would dream, he said he dreamt of fingering. So you can see what a central role fingering plays. So, and here's the second example. And again, with what Bach says about watching what comes before and after, you can see in this example as well, he's demonstrating how the thumb is kept away from the black note. And so he sees that the G goes down to the F sharp. So he doesn't use the second finger here, because if he used the second finger, it would mean he'd have to place the thumb on the F sharp. So in order to cater for that F sharp, he begins on the third finger. So he has the second finger still available to play the F sharp, and which will keep the thumb away from the black note. So there you can see in action, or how he's demonstrated. And with the AC fingering, you would use the 5 instead of the 4. So here they are. And in the next example, you can see that Bach might be demonstrating the influence a leap coming beforehand or a stretch has on the choice of fingers. So because of that leap, then the thumb is on that C. Because otherwise he might put the second finger on the C. But the thumb is on the C. There. And with the AC fingering, on the interval of a second, you'd use your third finger on the D instead of the second finger. Although you could use that finger with the AC fingering system too. That would go. It's just like I said in the last videos, there's the hierarchy. So I think the third finger, you might notice it in the example, a difference. It's very subtle, perhaps on the video, but if you try it yourself, you'll notice it's a lot more tangible when you experience it, and not just with the hearing, and the differences in the sound and in the rhythm. So you might, I don't know if you'll notice that here, blink and you'll miss it. They're very short examples. So that's them. And the next example, again, you could say he's demonstrating the influence the leap has on the choice of fingers with the second. And so that would explain why he uses 5 and 4 on the A and B. And with the AC fingering, you'd use 3 instead of the 4 on the A. And here it is. Now on the left hand, you can see again, it's demonstrating how what comes before and after helps decide the fingers. The top line is going G, A and B, and so Bach reserves 3, 2 and 1 for those 3 notes, and out of that comes the other fingers. And with the AC fingering, you could use the 2 and the 3 as there, and then 1 and 5 on the F and B, or you could use 1 and 3 on the A and G, and then 1 and 5 on the B and F. So there's that. The next example, you know, you have the triad or the arpeggio, and you can see how the fingers how Bach has divided up the fingers, giving the B, A, G and F 2, 3, 4 and 5. So that would explain that. And with the AC fingering, you'd use 1, 3 and 5 on the arpeggio, and then 3 and 5 on the G and F, no, like 5 and 3 on the G and A, and then 5 and 1 on the F and D. And the next one, the influence of the leap with the AC fingering. You'd use 3 instead of the 2, although you could use that Bach provides. And the last example, again, the influence of the leap, how that on the decision of which fingers to use. And with the AC fingering, I'd use 3 instead of the 4 on the D of the interval of the second. And you could see with the AC fingering that when Bach says that for an interval of a second, you'd use 2 adjacent fingers to play it. With the AC fingering, you're not necessarily using 2 adjacent fingers. Very often you will use 1 and 3 to play 2 adjacent notes, or you'll use 3 and 5. So it's not necessarily the case that you'll use 2 adjacent fingers with the AC fingering. Gebrochene Sekunden werden mit abgewechselten Fingern so gespielt, wie bei Figur 41 zu sehen ist. Dieses Abwechseln ist der über solche Art Noten gewöhnlichermaßen angedeuteten Schleifung zuträglicher als das Fortsetzen eines Fingers, weil durch dieses Letztere die Noten mehr gestoßen werden, als es sein soll. Wir sehen hier und werde es in der Folge noch öfter erfahren, dass gemeiniglich der Daumen und der zweite Finger an der linken Hand am meisten an den Orten gebraucht wird, alwo man in der rechten Hand den zweiten und dritten Finger einsetzt. So here's figure 41, the examples. And the first example, well, there's something a bit annoying about that paragraph, what he says. He says when the thumb and second finger is used, and you can see that it's there in the second example, in the left hand, the thumb and second finger is used. He says that will be used on those places where mostly the second and third finger of the right hand is used. But you can see that when the second and third finger is used, that is the first example. And so what I'd imagine he meant to say, or he might mean, that you use 1 and 2 on the left hand, where mostly in those places where you'd use 3 and 2 on the right hand and not 2 and 3. So yeah, that's a little annoying. There's a very important element in that regarding interpretation, and the information in that chapter I would take note of it in connection with other information regarding interpretation. And it's when he's talking about the slurring that usually occurs in those notes. And not sure how many translations you'll get where they actually translate that as slurring, the Schleifung, because I mean I come up with a lot of translations knowing the book so well and cross-referencing and from the context in all the different ways the word appears, then I figure out what he actually means. But like Anschlag, it means attack. It doesn't necessarily mean the literal translation of the word when he uses those words. or gestoßen means to push, if you look it up in the dictionary. But this is not what he means. And if you translate it like the Schleifung could mean a slide, I've sort of get the impression that people have translated as glissando, you know, because it's a slide. But it's not. That's not correct. It's a slur, it's legato, it's joined, it's smooth. So there's an important indication about the performance of those in that paragraph. Now with the first, so you see there in the first example on the right hand, that alternating of the finger he's talking about, and that achieves the effect better than when you carry on. So if you carried on with the third finger on the D, that it would mean that the D in the first half of those four notes would be too shortened, more shortened than it should be. So he recommends the alternating of the finger. And with the AC fingering, you could potentially use 2 and 3. You would not use 3 and 4. With the AC fingering, I'd use 1 and 3, and then 3 and 5. And perhaps you'll hear the difference. I'll play all 4 now, demonstrate them. You might hear a difference in the different fingerings. And while 3-5 might not be your first choice, and it might not be my first choice, I think it is still better than 3 and 4 at the end of the day. And as well, you could try it, making sure the little finger is curved. The thumb is bent, the middle finger is curved. If you're trying this with the little finger not being curved, you're not going to experience you're not going to have the proper experience. So, and you might notice a difference. Well, here they are. And then there's the left hand. Again, you'd use 3 and 1 and 5 and 3 with the AC fingering. Or you could use 3 and 2, as is there. And here's the same kind of idea, only descending. And the fingering, the AC fingering will go the same. You'd use 3 and 1 or 5 and 3. You could use the 3 and 2, but you wouldn't use 4 and 3. And in the left hand, with the AC fingering, you could use 1 and 2 or the 2 and the 3, but you'd rather be using 1 and 3, and you could use 3 and 5. Now the next example is showing again the influence that the black key has on the fingering and keeping the thumb away from the black key. So he starts on 2. Instead of it going 1, 2 as in the previous, as it did in the left hand in the previous example, he's going 2, 1. And here you can see he's not alternating the finger anymore. He doesn't have a finger. Normally you're using the finger that comes to the right of the finger you've used, and you can see with the thumb on the left hand there is no finger to the right of the thumb, so he has to continue on with the thumb. And here's the AC fingering. So you go 2, 3, and then you can still alternate with the fingers going down to 1 and 3. And the last example of figure 41, you can see again the influence the black keys have. Bach goes 1 and 2, puts the 2 on the G sharp, and he can't alternate with the thumb. You know, you'd alternate with the going down on the left hand, you'd alternate with whatever finger it comes right of the finger you've just used. And the only finger to the right of the second finger is the thumb, which can't be used on the black key. So he doesn't alternate he doesn't alternate the fingers. He has to continue with the 2 to the 3, and then he continues with the 3 and the thumb on the E. And here's the AC fingering. And you can see, you could say with Bach's example that he has the beautiful mind logic, and you can see when you're not as stuck to that beautiful mind logic, with the AC fingering system you can keep the thumb from the black keys, and you can still alternate the fingers by going 1, 4, and then 2, 4, 2, 3, 1, 3, 1, 4, and I go down to the bottom of the octave. I didn't go further with Bach's. I don't go further with Bach's one because, he didn't write in the fingering, so I don't want to, misrepresent them. But I'll go down to the lower octave with the AC fingering. So you can see with the AC fingering you can still maintain that alternating of the finger despite the black keys. And it's those black keys which prevents Bach from being able to do it. Even though he says it's better when playing 2 notes with those slurs that usually often come with them. And I just wanted to say that with the AC fingering, I came up with the decision or the realization that the thumb should stay away from the black keys and the little finger should stay away from the black keys. That is the same with the AC fingering system as it is with Bach. And I arrived at that conclusion completely independently of Bach. I I had no idea Bach said, you know, at the time when I came to that conclusion, that he said the thumb and the little finger should stay away from black keys. So I just wanted to say that we agree there, and there has been no, I came to that conclusion, that same conclusion independently of Bach. So I just wanted to say that for what it's worth. So here's that last example. Now this paragraph, there's a lot in it, a lot of examples. So I'm just gonna read part of the paragraph and then stop and look at the examples and then continue on with the rest of the paragraph to get, so it just isn't too much and that the information isn't too spread out. Okay. Bei Anschlagung von Terzien merke man, dass sie mit denjenigen Fingern gegriffen werden, welche wir bei denen unter Figur 42 bezeichneten vielen Exempeln finden. Man sieht hier ebenfalls auf das Vorhergehende und Folgende. Der Daumen bleibt von den halben Tönen weg, desgleichen der kleine Finger. Beide können bloß die Erlaubnis bekommen, auf solche halbe Töne gesetzt zu werden, wenn ein vorhergegangener oder noch folgender Sprung dieses notwendig macht. Ich habe deswegen vielerlei Exempel hierbei angeführt, weil oft viele Terzien hintereinander vorzukommen pflegen, die hierzu nötige Abwechslung der Finger deutlich zu zeigen. So here's figure 42, the first 4 examples, or 2 examples. So I'll just talk through it. You can see now, because if I don't talk through it, it can just be, you know, at first glance it's just a whole pile of numbers and notes. So just to kind of put some order to it, to what we're seeing. In that first example he provides, you can see, if you look at with the right hand, the top notes, you can see how with the G, F, E and D he uses 5, 4, 3 and 2, and then he, since the 4 is on the F, it stays on the F, then when it goes back up to the F and the E. So that would explain, yeah, how he came up with those fingers. And he, on the lower notes he uses the corresponding fingers till he reaches the thumb. Then he continues with the thumb until it goes back up again, and he switches back to the second finger, since that was already on the F. No, it was already on the D at the, you know, in the second third of the example. So he uses the second finger again on the D, and then the thumb again on the C. And here's the AC fingering. You can use, in brackets, you can use the second finger instead of the thumb. That as well would go. The only stipulation is that you don't use the fourth finger. So that would be the AC fingering for that example. I just wanted to say about the example, I try and play Bach's example as good as possible. I want you to hear the best possible you know, I don't like it when you play something worse in order to make a point to suit your narrative. So I try and present Bach's fingering as good as possible. The different tempos that you might hear now in the examples that come up, that is the natural speed that as a result of the fingering. So if I play Bach's example slower than with the AC fingering, that is the natural speed that that fingering kind of creates. So here's the right hand of that example. And so if you look at the left hand, you can see with the left hand that in terms of looking at the notes that come before and after, you can see that he's rather gearing it to, with the right hand it was geared to the upper notes of the two sets of notes, and with the left hand it's rather geared towards the lower notes of the two sets of notes, and the lower notes is E, D, C, B, that he reserves 2, 3, 4 and 5 on the left hand to play those. And the same, you know, so you can see how that's the method that Bach is illustrating here in this example. And here's the AC fingering for the left hand. And again, you can use the 2 or the 1. The only requirement with the AC fingering is that you don't use the 4th finger. So here's the left hand. With the next example, again you can see how with the upper notes, Bach geared the fingering in the right hand with the upper notes, the D, E, F, G, he gives 2, 3, 4 and 5, and then the other fingers corresponding to those. And this is the AC fingering. And again, you just apply the formula. The only requirement is that you can't use the 4th finger. And here's the left hand. And again, you can see Bach has looked at the lower notes when assigning fingers on the left hand. So that B, C, D and E, he gives 5, 4, 3 and 2. And then the upper notes are then played with the fingers accordingly. And when he runs out of fingers, he reuses the thumb. And here's the AC fingering. Whether you begin with 1 and 3 or 2 and 5 or 1 and 5, it's, you know, that's all interchangeable. You can apply the formula as you like with the AC fingering. Now the third example, you can see how he's, perhaps if you see the C and the E is going to B and D, so with the upper notes, he assigns, since the E is going down to the D, he uses the 3rd on the E, and then he has the 2nd finger for the D. So you could see perhaps how the method there he's illustrating. And here's the AC fingering. And so you can use the 3rd finger with the E and G, or you can use the thumb. Both are possible with the AC fingering. And on the left hand, again, he seems to be orientating himself by the lower notes of the two, the lower set of notes. So the C in the middle is going down to the B. So that might explain why he picked the fourth finger for that, and the fourth and second finger for that opening C and E, because he keeps the third and fifth ready for available for when it goes down to B and D. And here's the AC fingering. Again, you can use the thumb or the third finger. Here's the fourth example. You can see what he's showing here is the influence that the black key has, and you can see he's keeping the thumb away from the black key. So he uses, he crosses the second finger over the thumb to play that F sharp. And this fingering here that Bach provides, that's exactly the AC fingering system. There's, that can be used. And here's the AC fingering. And you can also use, so you can use that what Bach provides, but you can also put the thumb instead of the third finger on the B and D and on the A and C. And the left hand, you could imagine, why does he begin with the fourth finger on the G instead of the little finger? Is because of the F sharp that's coming up. If he was to play the little finger on the G, it would mean moving the little finger to the F sharp, but the little finger has to stay away from the black keys. So that would explain why he uses the fourth finger on the G. And here's the AC fingering for the left hand. And you can see you can cross the fourth finger over the fifth. And I'm not using the second finger on a white key, using the thumb. Here's the next example. You can see again how he keeps the thumb away from the black key, and how he's looked at the continuation, and that it works out that it goes down to the A, so he has the thumb available to play the A. And then you might say here with the E flat, hold on a second, he has the little finger on a black note. But this would be an example where he says a leap might make it necessary. And you could wonder, why doesn't he use the fourth finger on the E flat? And you will see then at the end of this paragraph that he offers an explanation as to why he doesn't use the fourth finger. And here's the AC fingering, and you can use the thumb instead of the, where instead of the third finger, where it's written in brackets. And with the AC fingering, you can use the fourth and the third finger on the C and the E flat. And on the left hand, you can as well see how Bach keeps the little finger away. I mean, here you can see he keeps the little finger away from the black key, and how he's watching out. And above as well, he keeps the thumb on the E flat in the left hand away from the black key, so he's using 2 and 3, the 2 on the E flat. And that 5-3-3-2, that is applicable with the AC fingering system. And with that B flat, you'd be using, and the D, instead of 4-2, you'd be using either 4-1 or 4-3. So here's the AC fingering, and here they are demonstrated. In the next example, you're seeing how the fingerings are adjusted to cater for a rise in the progression. He's looking at the top notes in the right hand. So because it goes up to the F sharp and the A, he's keeping the 3rd finger and the 5th finger ready for them. So he uses the 2nd and 4th on the E and the G at the beginning. So, and then how he switches the fingers then at the end, so he can rise to the next level then in the pattern. Here's the AC fingering, and you can see as well, that's it. That's the AC fingering. And here they are. So on the left hand, here's Bach's fingering, and you can as well see the combination of the influence of the black keys, and then how it's adjusted to cater for the rise in the progression. And here's the AC fingering for the left hand with that example. The next example, you can see Bach is illustrating the influence more black keys have on the choice of fingerings. And so you can see there when he goes to the F sharp and the A, how he uses the 2nd finger on the F sharp, and that 2 and 3, that would be in accordance with the AC fingering. And then again, you see the little finger on the E flat, and you go, hold on a second, what is that? And you can see that this is an example of where the leap makes it necessary, what he's talking about, what he said in the paragraph. You can see on the B flat then, the 2nd finger, the thumb is kept away. And that's how it is. And when I was playing this, now I'm playing it as best as I can, and what you're hearing is, I mean, I didn't practice the AC fingering or anything this is the way it comes out, is the way it comes out naturally. And when I tried Bach's fingerings, one of the first reactions I had was, oops, I need to practice this. And it was a bit of a like a blast from the past, because I haven't had that feeling in a long time, in years and years, where you know, like as soon as you try it, you know, okay, this is shaky, this doesn't work out, this is gonna, if you imagine it in a being in a piece, you'll think, okay, I'm gonna need to spend a month or two on this, practicing it, doing it slowly. I'll have to break out the metronome, you know, to try and get used to it, get to know it. And I would say if you were to, and so I had that reaction when I tried box fingerings. And you can see in this there's a lot of alternating, the fingers are alternating between black and white keys. You can feel how unpleasant that little finger on the E flat is, that it doesn't feel secure. And I would say that if you were to try box fingerings and really kind of observe each, you know, what makes it so, what creates this feeling like, oops, I'm going to need to practice this. This needs practice. And where you'll have to start playing the notes. Well, if you observe every single third there with that fingering, and if you were to rate each one, I would say that the F sharp and the A with the 2 and the 3 would come out the winner, as would the G and the B flat with the 1 and 2. That those 2/3 you will see when you try each third in that sequence with box fingerings, that those are the 2 that'll work the best. And none of the others work well. And here's the AC fingering, and you can see that the thumb and the little finger is kept away from the black keys. And if you try that, you might notice the difference. You might understand, like, I'm not deliberately trying to play box ones worse. And if you try it yourself, you'll be able to maybe sympathize with me and realize, yeah, no, he's not. And you might notice yourself making sure that you have the little finger curved and the second finger flat and the fourth finger flat for the black keys. You will notice the same effect the 2 versions of fingerings has on your playing as well. And they might go, yeah, no, he wasn't putting it on or doing it deliberately. That is natural, what's happening. So here they are for the right hand. And then in the left hand, again, is showing the effect the black notes have. And you can see with the AC fingering for the right hand, I'm crossing the thumb under basically the second finger in that leap to get to the 1 and 4 on the E flat and C. And you can see that because of the leap, Bach avoids any crossing over when he makes that leap in the right hand. But you can see in the left hand with that leap that he's crossing the 4th finger over the 3rd finger to get to that leap. And you can see as well that he is more serious about keeping the thumb away from the black keys than he is at keeping the little finger away from the black keys, because on the right hand he avoids crossing over any fingers and he puts the little finger on the black key, but he does not put the thumb on the black key in the left hand. So and you can see there it's kind of inconsistent with the left and right hand. On the left hand he's crossing over crossing the finger under, the fourth finger under the third. And on the right hand, he's avoiding any crossing over. And if you look at the AC fingering, you can see that in the left hand, I'm crossing the second finger over the thumb in the left hand to make that leap. And in the right hand, I'm crossing as well the thumb under the, passing the thumb under the second finger to make that leap. So there's a consistency there with the AC fingering that isn't there with Bach's fingering. So here's the left hand with the two. And if you were to rate every single third with the AC fingering, you would see that they're all equally good. Every single one of them. There is not a single weak third in that sequence, as opposed to the fingering Bach supplied. And I want to say with the finger position that I've shared, all those aspects, and with the AC fingering, when you play thirds, they come together exactly, naturally and automatically. You do not have to work on them. If you try any of these examples with Bach's fingerings, if you try and pick up the speed and maybe repeat the pattern, you might notice that the fingers start to fall apart, break apart, and it gets increasingly harder to keep them together with the AC fingering. And so that's the element, that's all part of the oops, I need to practice this feeling. And when you play that sequence in the, it's in G flat minor, it's not going to feel comfortable. You're gonna feel like you need to practice this, and you won't be able to play around with it. Whereas with the AC fingering, you will notice that you can kind of play through that as you like. You can jump around, you can kind of improvise playing those thirds. You don't feel any restrictions, and you don't feel any need to practice them. You just play them, and they'll come in. Those thirds, you'll play them precisely and exactly together all the time. So the next examples, they seem to be, Bach is demonstrating the different ways you can approach a black key without using the thumb. So that would perhaps explain these next three examples. And with the AC fingering, in the first one, you'd use the little finger instead of the fourth finger. In the next one, you'd use the little finger instead of the fourth finger. Again, and in the third one for the left hand, you'd use the little finger instead of the fourth finger. But otherwise, the use of the second finger on a black key is the same. And you can see like hints of the AC fingering coming through in part of what Bach says. It starts to creep through when the fundamental principles are the same. The fingering then gets more similar. Der kleine Finger kann auch auf dem halben Tone sein, wenn der andere zugleich mit anschlagender Finger auch auf selbigem ist. Aus dieser Ursache ist die Applikatur der rechten Hand in dem bei A Tab 2 angeführten Exempel nicht so gut als die bei B und die für die linke Hand bei C. So you can see here's A, B, and B. And so that's kind of, he's recalling that E flat that came, you know, after the jump. So he's acknowledging there that that little finger on the E flat is not that good as the fourth finger on the E flat. And the second example in B, in the right hand, that fits. That is exactly AC fingering. And when you try them, you will see that that last one works the best of all of them. And that indeed that example at A on the right hand is the worst. And again, in the left hand, he shows that how the thumb is kept away from the black key. And then here's the example C. So he says that, so the example on A for the right hand is not as good as those in the left hand for C. And you can see there in the first one, with the third and fifth finger on the D, F sharp and D sharp, how that is illustrating what he said about when the other finger is playing a black key too, then you can use the little finger on a black key. So and it's even though he's using the little finger on the black key, that will explain why he would say it's still better than the example A in the right hand. And you can try it yourself, and you do notice a difference when you're playing the third finger and the little finger on two black keys instead of the third finger being on a white key. There is a significant difference there. And then you can see why the left hand would be better on that last example in C, in that he avoids using the little finger on the black keys as he does in the right hand. And so I'll play this one for the right hand, and here's the AC fingering, and so you can use the third finger on the F sharp. And again, you get that feeling with Bach's fingering, this needs practice. And any differences in tempo or whatever in the performance of it, it's purely natural. It has nothing to do with any deliberate manipulation on my part. And I'd prefer it if you were to try it yourself and understand from experience, oh yeah, he is kind of telling the truth, because you know the truth is my friend basically in this, in this situation. So I definitely would rather the truth coming out than above all else. So here's the AC fingering, and then for the left hand, I mean, you can see all the alternating between black and white keys that a finger has to do, like that fourth finger going from the E to the D sharp. And that, if you think of the finger staying where it is, it's the movement of the fingers that is, the fingers are not very good at moving. And the distance between a black and a white key for a finger, that is actual finger movement, where the finger has to change position. Otherwise it's just, up and down to play it, but this has to go forwards and backwards, left and right. And it's not a left and right that's governed by the arm or the wrist. It's a diagonal movement, or that the finger is in charge of. And it's a job it's not very good at. So when you're alternating the fingers between black and white keys, as you have to do with the fourth finger there in the left hand, going from the E to the D sharp, that's where that slows you down. So, and you can see with the AC fingering that you don't have to alternate any finger. And so here they are. Dieser kleine Finger wird ebenfalls so wenig fortgesetzt als durch einen anderen abgelöst, die, sondern kommt nur immer einmal, und zwar in den äußersten Tönen I vor. Es sei denn, wenn eine oder mehrere Noten zwischen die Terzien kommen, wie bei F zu sehen ist. So here's D. And so you can see the first example in D is illustrating the first bit of this sentence where he says that it will be as little continued, that little finger. So you can see in the example the little finger is continued from the D sharp to the C sharp. He's saying you don't do that. And then in the second example, there's a mistake there. If you look at the fingering, I have just written then in pencil a correction, but if you consider that fingering for the left hand, the 3 and the 2 on the D sharp and F sharp, if you think of the second finger on the D sharp and then the third finger on the F sharp, you know, it's obvious Bach didn't mean that. So that was a mistake. And I looked, it wasn't just in the modern notation, it was a mistake in the original notation that Bach provided. And so I think he probably meant to have the fifth, a 5 instead of the 2, because then that would make sense. That would illustrate how, you know, you're not continuing on with the little finger, but replacing it with the third finger as you move on. It would fit to the text. So I think that was a mistake there. So that should be 5 instead of 2. And you can see, I can guess that this is a similar way of thinking. This is a continuation of that thought that the thumb replaces the little finger. And so therefore it would make sense that you do not use it within the sequence, that you'd only use it on the outside, just as with the scales where he says you'd use the thumb instead of the little finger, and the little finger will be used, at the top of the scale or at the beginning of a scale, but not during the scale. And so it's the same idea that's governing the restriction of the little finger. And here's E, and you can see he's demonstrating how the little finger only comes in, on the very extremities of the passages. And what you have then, as a result, is a finger less. And that will as well be with normal fingering, that you don't use the little finger if you can at all avoid it, except that would be similar, that you use it, and if a passage ends with the little finger, that you'd use it then, but otherwise you'd avoid using it. What you have is you're using a finger less. And you might say, hold on, Alan, you're not using the fourth finger on the white keys. And I would say, yeah, but I'm using the fourth finger on black keys. So I use the fourth finger within the passage. Whereas with normal fingering and with Bach, with the idea of the thumb replacing the little finger, it means you're using the little finger neither on the white nor the black keys. So you do actually have a finger less with normal fingering than you do with the AC fingering system. So here's the first example in E. I'll just play it again. And here's the AC fingering system. And so you can see with the use of how the use of the little finger might influence the performance of that scale. And if you try it, you will notice the difference, you know, in the security, in the speed, in the naturalness that comes out when you play it. And you might think, hold on, thirds are not that difficult to play with the AC fingering. And you might as well, there's a chance here to realize how difficult normal fingering makes the playing of thirds, whereas the AC fingering simplifies the playing of thirds. And all that tension that results when you're playing thirds, the seizing up, it is all down to given that there's such a restriction on the use of the fingers that the fingers are constantly having to alternate. They're walking this tightrope that it's, you know, the fingers are terrible at navigating. When you actually are making the fingers move to find different locations as opposed to just staying where they are, they're much better at staying where they are and depressing the keys than they are at finding different spots as well. And it's the finding different spots as well. It's slowing you down. It's slowing down the progression. Yeah, so here they are for the right hand. And then for the left hand, you can see there's no alternating in the fingers between black and white keys. And here's the second example with E, and here's the AC fingering with E. And with the fingers in the brackets, that's just all the different. Again, like I said, it's a formula, and it doesn't really, every single version is good. And with any of these examples, you might kind of look through it and notice which fingers have to alternate between black and white keys. And you won't hear that anywhere. I don't think I haven't heard it anywhere else except here, that the alternating between black and white keys is even an issue. I mean, that never came up in you know, in my education to take that into consideration when choosing fingering. Bach mentions it more than I've heard it mentioned, in that he says about the thumb and the little finger staying away from the black keys. So here it is, and then the AC fingering. Here's the AC fingering and the performance of the left hand. So, and here's F. When he says, so when a note comes in between, then you can use the little finger more often. And with the AC fingering, I'd use a 3 instead of the 4 on the C. And you can hear the difference. And with the second example, it's almost exactly like AC fingering, except you'd used 3 on the C and the second third instead of the 4. Otherwise it stays the same. Ferner merke man aus den dritten und folgenden Exempeln bei Figur 42, dass einerlei Töne mit denselben Fingern genommen werden. So you can see there from that third example onwards how the same finger is used on the same tone. Bei vielen hintereinander vorkommenden Tertien, auf die Art wie die beiden Exempel G ausweisen, setzt man bei geschwindem Zeitmaße lieber mit den Fingern fort, indem alsdann das Abwechseln schwerer fällt. So here's the example for G. And so when you see that, you can see, I have heard it's said or attributed to Liszt that he came up with the idea of about discovering the benefits of, instead of alternating the fingers, to be using the same fingers on thirds and stuff. So I've heard that attributed to Liszt, that innovation. And there you can see that it was, that Bach knew it before Liszt. So anybody attributing that to Liszt would be inaccurate. And with the AC fingering, you would not use 2 and 4. And I would say if you try it, playing those thirds with the second and fourth, what you're going to experience most, I'd say, is it running away from you. And the accuracy, kind of that you'll start missing the notes, that you won't feel, the stability won't be there. It can work in a shorter range, but once that range gets bigger, it can feel, especially going upwards, it seems to work better going downwards, but ascending, it starts to, you might notice, you start to kind of, it goes fine as you go up, but then it starts, you start missing the, how you make the next step to the next third. It kind of, you don't hit it so accurately. And with the AC fingering, so you could use 3 and 1 to do it that way, or you could use the fingering here. That with that, the alternation, it doesn't slow you down. When you keep the 4th finger away from the black keys, the alternating of the fingers does not slow you down. And crossing the 3rd over the 5th finger can work, and you will notice that you don't suffer when you go further, that you don't have that same problem of it running away from you. What can be a bit maybe uncomfortable about this fingering and using it, and making sure your little finger is curved and your 3rd finger is curved and your thumb is bent. What can be a little, kind of feel a little weird, is you'll barely notice your fingers being used at all. So that might be a little off-putting at the start, but that would be something to try. Übrigens sehen wir, dass allerlei Setzung von Fingern bei diesen Tertien vorkommen, obschon einige öfter als andere. Bloß 5-1, 5-2, 4-3 sind unnatürlich und folglich verwerflich. So that's the paragraph. So you can see there that that Bach says some of the fingers that have occurred with the AC fingering system are unnatural and therefore objectionable. And you can translate verwerflich as reprehensible, but something tells me he's not quite have that word in mind. I would say objectionable is a more reasonable word to translate that with. So that 4-3, what he says is unnatural. That explains then why he picks the 5-3 for that E flat and C, in that example that I pointed out earlier. That would explain why he has that number there. 5-2 will be unnatural if the 2 is playing a white key. But if the 2 is playing a black key, you will realize how natural that is. And then 5-1, why it's unnatural. I could say that, why did he include those as being unnatural and objectionable? Part of it will be in connection with that idea that the little finger is not to be used in, in the context of, within a phrase, that it's only used if the phrase ends on the extremities, like in the beginning or the end of a phrase, but never during the phrase, in the middle of a progression or of a sequence. And so that would explain why the use of 5 generally would be part of what would make it, would be why it would be deemed unnatural, because it's considered unnatural. To have the little finger in the middle of a scale, as the AC fingering has the little finger. And as well, it would make sense when you think of the beautiful mind logic. If you think that beautiful mind logic is the only logic that can be applied, and you can see the way the AC fingering doesn't apply that, well then, when you think in the context that use of the little finger, that would as well explain how you could come to the conclusion that it's unnatural and, as a result, objectionable. Yeah, so Gebrochene Tertien einzeln oder auch in einer Folge bei langsamen Zeitmaß werden so gespielt, wie wir sie zusammen anzuschlagen im vorigen Paragraph gelehrt haben. Viele hintereinander in geschwindem Tempo vorkommende Tertiensprünge werden, solange keine halben Töne sich einmischen, ohne Abwechslung der Finger entweder mit 1-3 oder 2-4 gegriffen. Tab 2, Figur 43a. Sobald aber halbe Töne dabei vorkommen, so wechselt man mit den Fingern ab und hält den Daumen von den halben Tönen zurück. B. In Haltungen und Sprüngen wird auch die Setzung 5-3 und 2-1 gefunden. C. Der Daumen kriegt hierbei die Erlaubnis, auf die halben Töne gesetzt zu werden, welche ihm die Notwendigkeit bei solchen Spannungen gibt. So here's figure 43. And with the AC fingering, you can use 1 and 3. You would not use 2 and 4. And here's with the AC fingering, you can use, you know, if you wanted to play it really fast, if you had those to play fast, like they will often come up in a, you know, a cadenza for Mozart or something, a rising sequence in broken thirds like that. And you could use 1, 3, 2, 5 with the AC fingering system, and that works fairly well. I mean, quite well, and it requires zero metronome practice or any of that, as long as you're using the finger position that I've shared. And yeah, you can, you know, you discover the benefits or the treasure of what it is I'm sharing. The only way is to try it yourself, and it's going to open up a new world for you. And here is B. You can see how he's keeping the thumb away from the black keys. And wherever there's a white key, you'd be using the little finger instead of the fourth finger with the AC fingering system. And you'd not necessarily use the third finger there in the G sharp. The fourth finger plays a black key better, so that would be the reasoning why you'd be thinking maybe it's better to use the fourth finger instead of that third finger. But you can see that it works the same with the AC fingering in terms of keeping the thumb away from the black keys. And here's the second example of B. Same goes again for those. And here's C. The first one is exactly AC fingering for the right hand. With the left hand, if you can use the second finger, but I would prefer if you can stretch that, I would always rather opt for the third finger instead of the second finger. And then with C, the second example of C, you can see Bach's fingerings that he supplied. And then with the AC fingering, I'd continue to use 5 and 3. You wouldn't use 4 and 2 at all. And so here it is. And perhaps you can hear a difference in the two versions. And here's the left hand. Bach uses 1 and 2 and then 2 and 4. I would again use 1 and 3 with the AC fingering system for all of it. And if you were trying them, you could notice where do you slip up? What finger is it? Sometimes you might not slip up with the fourth finger, but the fact that the fourth finger can't play a white key will cause the finger coming after it to mess up, because the fourth finger is upsetting the rhythm. It's upsetting the continuation. It does a lot of damage when it's left to play a white key. So you will always, I would, if you start to pay attention to that, you will always notice problems are either with the fourth finger or directly after the fourth finger has come into play on a white key. So, and here's the third example. Again, with the AC fingering, use 3-1 the whole time instead of 4-2 and instead of 2-1. And with the left hand, I'd use 3-5 all the time. With the fourth example, I'd use 1-3 the entire time instead of 1-2. And with the left hand, with the AC fingering, you'd use 3-5 the entire time. I wouldn't switch to 4-2. And here's the second last example in C. You can see the fifth finger is on the black note and the thumb is used on the black keys. And this would be an example as well where with the AC fingering system you're going to have to make some decisions as to what to do. I would still strike that G sharp with the fourth finger and then I would switch. Without lifting up the key, I'd change the fourth finger to the fifth finger on that G sharp so I can reach those ones below. And as soon as possible, I'd take the thumb away from the black key. I wouldn't use the second finger on the B sharp. I try and use the third finger on the B sharp because it's all, if I have to alternate, it's causing tension, and that can cause problems then further on in the piece, if you think of that in the context of a piece. So, and here's the last example with C. And you can see the leap Bach allows the little finger on the black note because of the leap, and he allows the thumb on the black note because of the leap. And here I would still rather use the fourth finger on the G sharp because I have a better sound. It has a better effect, I don't know, there's more buoyancy, there's more life, there's more pulse, there's more rhythm in the use of the fourth finger there. And I would consider the danger of the leap to be a lesser evil at the end of the day. And when the fourth finger, the leaps are not you can go at all lengths to avoid a leap, but then if you think of a piece like La Campanella, all of a sudden the leaps are huge. And if you think of the distance, in a piece like La Campanella, if you think that the extra distance you have to travel to get the fourth finger on that note instead of the fifth, it's marginal. It's a centimeter or two or three compared to the distance it has to travel. So like on the one hand, you'll go at all lengths to avoid any leaps. On the other, leaps are part of it. So, you know, I would still choose the fourth finger on the G sharp. I'd keep the little finger off the black keys there. I'll leave it at that for today. The thirds are a big one. You can see, I mean, there's all the examples there. And, you know, there's a lot. And the examples are as much a part of what Bach is sharing as the text is. So I can't really gloss over them. Not if I'm going to. I mean, eventually we'll get to the end of this chapter, and then that'll be it with fingering for the most part. There'll be no mention of fingering anymore. So while I'm doing it, I might as well do it, you know. So that's it. Till the next time. Thanks. Bye.